Hey guys, tonight we tiptoe through the dusty corridors of time, into a world of patchy beards, saintly scapulas, and powdered wigs so enormous they might technically qualify as siege engines. You're standing in a dimly lit medieval chamber, somewhere in the Frankish Empire, and someone is sobbing, probably a monk who just got assigned to copy out another royal haircare decree. The air smells faintly of goat tallow, manuscript ink, and disappointment. The walls are lined with portraits of kings staring grimly into the middle distance, each one looking like they've just been told they're out of truffles again, and that, dear listener, is your first hint that tonight will not be survivable in the conventional sense. You're about to spend hours traipsing through the most gloriously petty, vain, and questionably perverted footnotes in medieval royalty. But don't worry, it's all strictly PG-13, absurdly over-documented, and told so gently it might just put you to sleep, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know your location and what time you're listening. I love seeing just how many of us are out here half asleep and learning strange things together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in West Francia. 9th century. The candlelight is flickering over a highly polished bronze mirror, and King Charles the Bald is fussing over his reflection. Again. He's not just bald, he's really bald. So bald, in fact, that his courtiers begin referring to him by the one thing he clearly did not want to be remembered for. He had plenty of other titles, Emperor of the Romans, King of West Francia, and once, briefly, the Count of Too Many Hats, but alas, history has clung to the dome. The thing is, Charles wasn't actually born bald. Historians still argue whether the nickname came later in life, after stress, disease, or royal hat hair took its toll. Some insist it was ironic, that he had an impressively thick mane in his youth. Others think the name was more political, possibly a term of endearment by annoyed nobles watching him pull off his third coronation stunt in a decade. But no matter the origin, Charles leaned into it with the kind of energy only a medieval monarch with unchecked power and way too much leisure time could. You trail him through his private chambers, watching as he dictates a royal edict about wig tariffs. That's right. Not military matters. Not trade policies, but the price and importation of fashionable hairpieces. You'd think it's a joke until you notice how seriously his scribes are nodding. There's even talk of a royal wig inspector, a court-appointed man whose job is to measure curls for authenticity and possibly duel any fraudulent toupee merchants. Charles's own headgear is legendary. The chronicles describe him wearing gold-threaded wigs for state occasions, some topped with mini crowns, others with embedded sapphires, and at least one rumored to have been laced with crushed frankincense for spiritual aroma. That's probably fringe gossip, but it's too fabulous not to picture. You peek at one of the royal inventories and find something you didn't expect, a list of scented oils, imported hair powders, and at least 3 types of animal fat, all for scalp conditioning. There's bear lard for shine, goose grease for softness, and something ominously labeled bishop's balm, the recipe for which is lost to time, and probably for the best. The king paces his chamber barefoot, muttering about that smug Carolingian cousin with the cowlick, as if scalp envy were a pressing state matter. Occasionally, he summons monks to read aloud descriptions of Saint Samson, patron of hair restoration. You can't tell if he's looking for divine help or just shopping for new role models. At one point, he tries to pass a decree banning drawings that depict him from behind. That law, thankfully, doesn't survive, though it does spark an early trend in royal portraiture. Everyone painted him from the waist up, at a flattering 3/4 angle, head slightly turned, never too much crown, never too much skull, but Charles's vanity doesn't stop with wigs. You trudge behind him as he tours newly built palaces, instructing architects to lower ceiling mirrors and raise the polished bronze panels so that no matter where he stands, he can see how regal he looks. During one feast, he orders his reflection to be projected via shield polish across a line of servants. The effect is more blinding than inspiring. Meanwhile, his court is teetering under the weight of cosmetic expenditures. One year, he slashes the budget for border defenses to fund capillary enhancements. You picture a council meeting in full chainmail, nodding solemnly as the treasurer announces that half the treasury has gone to goosefat and mint scalp butter. Your favorite detail, though, might be the royal hairdresser's manual, a now fragmented manuscript that includes morning incantation for strong growth and an illustration of a courtier brushing a bald pate under moonlight. The manual warns, never stroke against the grain, even though the grain in this case is mostly wishful thinking. It wasn't all foolishness, of course. Despite his follicular fears, Charles was actually a competent ruler, sometimes. He survived rebellions, brokered truces, and expanded monasteries with vigor. But even his reforms got tangled up with vanity. When he restructured the monastic dress code, the new robes came with custom hoods, shaped to fit high foreheads. Some monks whispered that the king's obsession with hair mirrored his insecurity about divine favor. After all, in medieval iconography, thick hair often symbolized youth, strength, even holiness. Saints had lush curls, prophets were bearded and thick-maned. A bald king in the age of miracles might feel unnervingly exposed, both literally and symbolically. That didn't stop the jokes. One ballad, preserved anonymously in the margin of a monk's recipe book, compares Charles's scalp to the polished dome of St. Peter's egg. Another calls him the Candle King, for his tendency to blind attendants during sunrise meetings with the reflected glow from his head. Royal slander has never been subtle. But the best bit? Near the end of his reign, Charles is said to have commissioned a royal chapel shaped like a wig stand. Yes, the chapel of St. Vitalis in Compiègne had a domed roof, narrow base, and, at least according to one highly suspect sketch, a golden cap perched atop its steeple. Historians still argue whether this was intentional, symbolic, or simply architectural coincidence. Personally, you suspect the builders were trolling him, and yet, as the flickering candle gutters out in his chamber, you can't help but feel a little sorry for Charles. Beneath all the powdered wigs and ego-polishing edicts was a man clearly haunted by something more than just his shiny crown. Maybe it was legacy. Maybe it was anxiety. Or maybe, just maybe, it was an itchy scalp. You're still in the thick of medieval France, though the air now carries the faint, powdered scent of lavender oil and something less comforting, like boiled leather shoes. There's a mirror hanging just slightly off-kilter in the corridor you're walking down, and somewhere nearby, a courtier is arguing about hem lengths. You round the corner, and there he is, Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, standing still as a statue while a servant adjusts the fall of his velvet sleeves. It's not that he's conventionally fair in the prince-on-a-horse sense, though he does have a symmetrical face, a sharp jawline, and a crown that somehow never looks crooked. It's more that he knows how to look the part. In fact, Philip is so invested in appearances that he essentially invents a kind of pre-modern branding. You might not be wearing a hoodie with his crest on it, but everyone else in court knows, this king doesn't just rule, he curates, he's an image man. An image, in this case, involves clothing laws. You sidle past a group of courtiers waiting in silence for the latest sumptuary edict, those delightfully absurd royal laws regulating what people could and couldn't wear. In Philip's court, shoes can't curl past a certain length, collars mustn't exceed 6 inches, and don't even think about lace unless you've got a title and 2 ancestral manors to back it up. Tailors tremble as the royal inspectors arrive with measuring sticks and disgusted expressions. One poor duchess, legend says, was fined for wearing a headpiece so structurally ambitious that birds began nesting in it. Probably an exaggeration. Probably, historians still argue whether Philip's fashion obsession was about morality, class order, or just personal pettiness. The official reason was to maintain social clarity. If peasants started dressing like knights and knights like princes, the world would collapse, or worse, the wrong person might get better seating at a feast. But many suspect Philip's real concern was being outshined, even momentarily. After all, This is a man who reportedly dismissed an ambassador because his hat demanded too much attention. You trail him through a hall of mirrors. Not metaphorical ones. Literal mirrors. Imported from Venice, polished within an inch of their silvery lives, and angled just so that Philip can see himself from every possible viewpoint during royal processions. You suspect it's less about vanity and more about control, the same instinct that leads him to impose taxes on the church, dissolve the Knights Templar, and quietly bribe Rome into favoring French cardinals. But tonight isn't about politics. Tonight is about the surreal quiet of his court. The hushed sound of velvet shoes against marble, and the whispered debates about whether silk should be banned in autumn. One particularly bizarre moment finds you eavesdropping on a color crisis. Apparently, someone dared to wear a robe in a hue too close to royal purple. That's a serious offense in this court, especially since Philip had recently ordered that a new shade, imperial ash violet, be reserved for himself. You picture a medieval Pantone catalog, and yes, someone's taking this very seriously. He also once proposed a law requiring all noblewomen to wear gloves in public, white for unmarried, blue for widowed, and embroidered gold if actively negotiating a betrothal. The glove code never passed, but that doesn't stop courtiers from whispering gossip based entirely on someone's handwear. Did you see her at Vespers? Blue gloves. And speaking to the wine merchant's son. Scandalous. But the obsession with appearances goes deeper than outfits. Philip is perhaps the only medieval king to employ what scholars today half-jokingly call facial propaganda. He commissions dozens, of near-identical paintings of himself. Each one follows a strict template: serene expression, left profile, no laugh lines, jaw ever so slightly forward. It's the 13th century version of a royal headshot folder. Even coins minted under his reign bear an idealized face with near-surgical symmetry. You wonder if anyone ever saw him smile. The chronicles are eerily silent on the matter, and then there's the mirror room, not the grand halls or the council chambers, but a private retreat built deep inside one of his palaces. The mirror room, rumored to have 23 polished silver panels, for strategically placed water basins for natural light reflection, and a single, throne-like chair in the center. It's where Philip reportedly meditated, practiced royal speeches, and, according to one French chronicle, recited psalms to his own reflection while correcting his posture. You find it hard to believe. Until you sneak a glance through the keyhole, there he is, motionless, gazing into the mirror with monk-like intensity. Is it vanity? Is it anxiety? Or is it that, like many kings of the era, he feared that power could slip away the moment his image faltered? After all, this was a world where political survival often hinged on whether people believed you were ordained by God, and didn't have weird teeth. The fringe tidbit that really seals the deal. A half-preserved letter from a Parisian glove merchant to his cousin in Lyon, complaining that His Majesty's toe demanded its own silk casing, which he had to deliver without ever lifting his eyes to the royal calf. Whether this toe glove ever existed remains one of those facts historians whisper about over wine and quietly wish weren't true. Still, even Philip's quirks couldn't save him from scandal. His public trial against the Knights Templar involved not just accusations of heresy and corruption, but also fashion crimes. Some documents accuse the Templars of wearing belts of indecent fabric, which, given the context, may be the strangest thing you've ever heard shouted in a courtroom. But the crown jewel of Philip's legacy, at least tonight, is his brief attempt to outlaw all art that portrayed anyone more attractive than himself. The decree didn't last, of course. Artists rebelled, noble patrons pushed back, and one particularly bold tapestry maker sent Philip a subtle jab, a series of wall hangings portraying the king as a goat surrounded by roses. When asked for an explanation, the artist claimed it was purely allegorical. He was, not coincidentally, never seen again. As you drift deeper into the velvet-draped palace, your feet muffled by imported carpets and your eyes adjusting to the flickering candlelight, you feel the weight of a kingdom that treated fashion not as frivolity, but as infrastructure. Philip didn't just dress for the throne, He built an entire system around how people should look at him. Not speak to him. Not obey him. Just look, and so, with the hush of slippered feet and the soft rustle of perfectly hemmed robes behind you, you slip away from the court of Philip the Fair. You leave behind the golden buttons, the sleeve inspections, and the panic over whether crimson counts as too ecclesiastical. The candles burn low. Somewhere, a tailor sighs. A mirror collects dust, and Philip. He still stands there, quietly studying the way light falls across his jawline. You wake, or maybe you never slept, in the damp stone corridors of Prague, where the torches sputter with a little too much drama and the goblets are always suspiciously full. It's the late 14th century now, and you're following the sound of hiccuping royal laughter. If the first two kings were obsessed with how they looked, the next monarch you're about to encounter is far more interested in how things feel, particularly when he's had too much to drink and there's a lion involved. Welcome to the chaotic, ale-soaked reign of Wenceslaus IV of Bohemia. The court smells like honey wine and hay. You pass through a drafty great hall, stepping over a suspiciously placed pile of feathers. As your guide, a tired-looking servant with a bandaged thumb, explains in a whisper that the king's new relaxation strategy includes befriending exotic animals, building a private zoo in the royal courtyard, and occasionally trying to wrestle bears. Yes, bears. Historians still argue whether Wenceslaus's menagerie was a genuine diplomatic symbol or just his excuse to never dine alone. The documents call it a serrarium, a royal collection of serious animals, which apparently means anything large, hairy, and willing to share a bath. There are lions in cages, cheetahs on chains, and a monkey who sits in on treasury meetings and may have once been knighted. The king, it seems, has developed an unusual hobby: nightly feasts with the animals. No, really. You shuffle toward a long, low dining table where platters of roasted meat have been placed at equal intervals, for guests both noble and quadruped. You're told not to sit too close to the leopard. He bites when someone drinks more than him. Tonight's menu includes a variety of meats, several wheel-shaped loaves of rye bread, and something that's either cheese or a soft helmet. Wenceslaus enters the room dramatically, robe slipping off one shoulder, crown askew, and proceeds to toast his lion. The lion does not toast back. There are records of him trying to teach a parrot to quote sections of Bohemian law. Not in Czech, Latin. The project failed after the bird learned only one phrase, nolo episcopari, or I do not wish to be bishop. Which is ironic, given that Wenceslaus's disputes with church officials were almost as famous as his animal parties. He had a thing for symbolic authority, meaning he liked surrounding himself with objects and beings that could technically stand in for him if he was indisposed. Once, during a council meeting he missed due to a multi-day nap, he reportedly sent a pig dressed in royal colors to sit in his chair. It caused a minor panic until someone realized the pig wasn't talking or voting. You wander the garden, crunching over gravel and stale apple peels, past crumbling statues and a broken sundial that Wenceslaus insists runs perfectly on cloudy days. This is where he liked to conduct spiritual walks with a tamed wolf. The wolf, by all accounts, was deeply confused by the royal monologues on tax farming and wine quality. At one point, Wenceslaus builds a stone bathhouse within sight of his throne room, claiming hot water helps him think. There are rumors he would hold court from the tub, issuing decrees while covered in flower petals and drinking wine from a goblet shaped like a goose. This habit doesn't endear him to his barons, who are increasingly tired of delivering reports to a shirtless monarch. Quirkier still is his nap enforcement policy. Wenceslaus reportedly issued a short-lived law that court proceedings could not begin before noon, and that anyone seen standing upright and productive before the cock's third crow would be fined for arrogant industriousness. No one's sure how many fines were ever collected, but behind the hilarity lies real tension. Wenceslaus's drinking and behavior eventually lead to his arrest, by his own nobles. More than once. In fact, he's the only Holy Roman Emperor who gets kidnapped repeatedly by his own people and still refuses to quit. You imagine him held in a tower, sipping wine through the bars and asking if the leopard got his breakfast. His personality vacillates between boozy affability and violent paranoia. One chronicle describes him inviting a group of nobles to a friendly meeting, then locking the doors and having 3 of them stabbed mid-toast. That one detail may be less PG-13 than we'd like, but don't worry, the rest of the guests were allowed to take leftovers home. Historians still argue whether Wenceslaus was mentally ill, strategically eccentric, or just terminally bored. Some say he was ahead of his time, experimenting with alternative diplomacy through theater, animals, and food. Others believe he was simply a bored, rich man with access to too many barrels of beer and not enough honest advisors. Either way, you watch as Wenceslaus tries to ride a donkey backward across the courtyard, possibly as a joke, possibly because he believes it's an omen of peace. It's hard to tell, because he's singing, and his court. Oh, they pretend it's all normal. That's the most fascinating part. There's a system here. A rhythm. Nobles arrive with diplomatic papers and pet treats. Scribes prepare 2 copies of every decree, one for the archives and one to be nibbled by the monkey for approval. It's chaos, yes. But it's organized chaos. You pass by a tapestry showing the king standing proudly between a bear and a flaming chalice. No one knows what it means, but the embroidery is detailed enough to show the bear wearing a small medallion, probably honorary. Some believe it represents the 3 pillars of his rule: strength, enlightenment, and questionable companions. There's even a brief attempt to canonize Wenceslaus. Not this Wenceslaus, obviously, but his namesake, Saint Wenceslaus I, who was everything this king was not: pious, stable, and notably not friends with a Capuchin monkey named Godfrey. But the king uses the connection as an excuse to throw lavish feasts every year on the saint's feast day, calling them spiritual synchronization events. No one stops him, one of the more peculiar details buried in the royal archives. A handwritten margin note, scribbled by a sleep-deprived monk: the king has instructed us to replace sin with dizziness in all court records involving wine. We comply, but God sees. You step through a final doorway into the king's private chapel, which is unexpected. Quiet. Sober. Scented with beeswax and lavender, lined with icons so old their paint has faded to ghostly pastels. There are no animal tracks here. No feather trails. Just a velvet kneeler and a single chalice resting under a carved wooden lion. For all his chaos, Wenceslaus built this room himself. Maybe he needed the silence. Maybe, like all eccentric kings, he had a private center that didn't match the public mask. Or maybe he just got tired of the monkey chewing the hymnals. As the torches burn lower and the monkey snores softly in the hallway, you realize something strange: you're kind of fond of him. Not the monkey, the king. Wenceslaus is no model monarch. But he feels real. Messy. Unfiltered. A medieval case study in overstimulation and unchecked eccentricity, wrapped in brocade robes and occasionally trying to teach ethics to a raccoon. You leave his court sleepy, amused, and just a little bit sticky from the ever-present honey wine. You emerge into the clear northern air, your robe slightly singed from a torch that got too close during the animal banquet. The memory of Wenceslaus's drunken wolf sermon still lingers behind your eyes. But there's no time to dwell. The next royal curiosity waits, and you've barely adjusted your belt when your guide hands you a stiff parchment stamped with a fish. You're in Denmark now, or Norway, or possibly Sweden, depending on which regnal title Eric of Pomerania is using this week. The Kalmar Union binds all 3 crowns together, and he wears them stacked like dinner plates. Eric considers himself one of the most enlightened monarchs in Christendom. You'll soon find out that enlightenment, in his case, means beard contests, aggressive piety, and a suspiciously large number of holes in the royal treasury. The corridors of his castle are bright with devotional tapestries and silver-framed mirrors. Every doorway has been widened slightly. You soon understand why. Eric has banned shaving at court. Yes, banned. Facial hair is no longer a choice. It is a religious imperative. Eric believes that the beard is a sacred veil, a divine symbol of masculinity, wisdom, and, this is key, royal authority. He cites biblical prophets. He quotes ancient Norse sagas. He issues declarations with names like on the ornament of the Lord's cheekbones and fines clean-shaven men for disfiguring the Lord's design. You pause before a polished oak mirror. Your own face, unfortunately, remains stubbornly smooth. A courtier appears and hands you a packet of ointment made from bear fat and sea kelp, an official beard tonic approved by the Bishop of Skara. You're told to apply it nightly under the full moon. Not growing a beard in Eric's court doesn't just make you unpopular, it makes you suspicious. Unbearded men are quietly accused of plotting, or heresy, or Swedishness. The line is thin. One poor knight, a blonde with unfortunate cheek fuzz, is exiled to a monastery where all the monks wear false beards just to keep morale up. You tour the hall of portraits. All of them depict Eric, at different angles, wearing different lengths of beard. One features him in profile, stroking his chin like a philosopher. Another has him gazing sternly at a mirror, his beard braided with pearls. You're informed he had his royal likeness updated every quarter year, depending on seasonal growth. Some portraits are rumored to have been corrected after the fact by court artists. A scandal erupts when one painting from his early reign is found to feature a clearly artificial beard glued on with fish glue. The artist is briefly imprisoned in the palace well. Eric's court runs on two rhythms, piety and facial hair. His daily schedule includes prayers at dawn, beard inspection at noon, and lectures on divine monarchy after dinner. He spends entire afternoons writing edicts on morality, especially sexual morality, most of which involve long preambles about how God likes order and dislikes shaved thighs. You sit through a sermon in the royal chapel. It's about sin, of course, but more specifically about how excessive perfume and tight sleeves tempt the soul toward ruin. You sneak a look at your tunic. It's only moderately tight. You loosen the belt, just in case. Eric's personal habits are monastic in theory, but puzzling in practice. He fasts for long stretches, then suddenly demands a salted herring banquet at midnight. He prohibits dancing at court, but allows ritual beard combing accompanied by lute music. He bans gambling, but plays dice alone and claims he's testing divine chance. He's also incredibly superstitious. The royal archives contain pages of marginal notes about omens: 3 magpies seen before a rainstorm, a red fox crossing the Queen's path, a priest sneezing during Massachusetts. Eric catalogs each one and uses them to shape royal policy. Once, after seeing a one-eyed raven, he delays a treaty signing by 6 weeks. Another time, he fires an advisor who refuses to bow to a dog that barked 3 times in the chapel. And then there's the dreams. Eric believes that God speaks to him in dreams, and writes them down in a royal dream register, a massive vellum tome covered in gold clasps. You're given a peek. It contains entries like, Tuesday, dreamt I was a great fish swimming in the Baltic. The Queen wore a crown of salt. Interpret as favor from Neptune. Friday, wolves gathered at the door. They howled in Latin. Possible rebellion in Norway. Sunday, my beard caught fire, but I laughed and became an angel. Must consult bishop. It's unclear who interprets these entries, but they do influence real policies. Trade embargoes have been issued based on aquatic symbolism. At least one invasion was postponed due to a nightmare involving melting chalices and a man in a skirt, possibly a reference to the Scottish. As for his private life, Eric's court is strangely quiet. There are few mistresses. No scandalous feasts. His queen, Philippa of England, is respected but rarely seen. Rumors swirl that he spends more time with bishops than barons, and more time grooming his beard than ruling, and yet, despite all this, he's not a complete disaster. He founds towns. He standardizes weights and measures. He promotes literacy among the clergy. He even launches an ambitious program to clean up piracy in the Orson Strait, though, oddly, he funds it by issuing licenses to some pirates, creating a new category called authorized coastal raiders. These legal pirates are given royal documents, wax seals, and beards trimmed in the style of the king. Their ships fly banners bearing a fish and a comb. Some become minor celebrities, giving beard-growing advice in taverns and baptizing their cannons with holy water. The economy, however, begins to wobble. The beard tax isn't enough. Trade with the Hanseatic League suffers. The nobles grow restless. They want a king who spends less time anointing his mustache and more time defending borders. Eventually, revolts erupt. First in Denmark, then in Sweden. Erik retreats, shaving nothing but his pride. He is deposed, slowly, painfully, and with considerable paperwork. You imagine him standing in front of a mirror, brushing his beard one last time as the nobles knock on the door. He flees to Gotland and becomes a pirate himself. Yes. Really, Erik of Pomerania, the former triple king, the beard prophet, the dream interpreter, spends his twilight years as a pirate, raiding ships in the Baltic and living in a castle filled with stolen goods and old portraits. He refuses to cut his beard. You picture him on the deck of a stolen cog, wind in his whiskers, shouting orders about divine justice while inspecting plundered beats. He writes long letters to the Pope, still convinced of his destiny. He occasionally signs them with drawings of fish. No one ever really knows what to do with Erik. He's not evil. Not even particularly cruel. Just odd, endearingly stubborn. Committed to ideals that no one else quite shares. And oddly consistent. He believed in his beard. In his divine right. In the moral weight of sleeve tightness. Even when the world stopped believing in him, you leave his story unsure whether to laugh or sigh. Perhaps both. His downfall wasn't the result of vice, but of irrelevance. The world kept turning. Beards fell out of fashion. Pirates grew more pragmatic. The people needed warlords, not dreamers. Still, you kind of like him. He never pretended to be anything else. As you board the next ship, bound for Castile, if the weather holds, you feel a faint breeze tug at your chin. It's soft. Almost wistful. Like the ghost of a beard that never quite grew. You arrive in Castile at dusk, where the air tastes like roasted garlic and the wind carries whispers of backroom oaths. The court of Alfonso XI awaits you, not with trumpets or silk rugs, but with the faint rustle of parchment and the scent of someone else's perfume on your borrowed cloak. Alfonso XI of Castile is not a man of moderation. Not in battle. Not in governance. And certainly not in bed. You are handed, before you even unpack, a bound ledger. Thick, leathery, studded with metal corners, it resembles a reliquary. But the inside is no gospel. It's a catalogue of the king's nightly romantic activities, kept with excruciating detail by royal scribes. One volume for each year of his reign. You flip it open and find, night of the feast of St. James. Shared his bed with Lady E.G., brunette, low voice, Castilian origin, no dowry. Left before lauds. Witnessed by 2 pages and a friar, night after return from Toledo. No companion. Rainstorm. King in poor spirits. Prayers before bed, yes. He even recorded the nights he slept alone. This is not court gossip. This is official record. Sealed, notarized, and filed next to war edicts and grain laws. Every morning, a scribe arrives at the king's door and asks, politely, of course, what the night yielded. If the answer is no one, the entry is still made. Chaste night, it might read. Solitary sleep. You wonder if it's more damning than the others. Alfonso's obsession with record-keeping is as much about order as it is about appetite. He believes a well-documented life is a virtuous life, even if that life includes more mistresses than saints on the liturgical calendar, which brings us to Leonor de Guzman. Alfonso has a wife, Maria of Portugal. A good woman. Politically strategic. Present at festivals. And largely ignored. His real affection, political and physical, belongs to Leonor. She is educated, ambitious, sharp-eyed. And she bears him 10 children. Not quietly. Not hidden. But with the full weight of royal attention, you pass a hallway where each of Leonor's sons has a portrait. Her quarters are larger than the Queen's. Her cousins have court appointments. Her name appears in tax documents. She is, unofficially, the queen of half the realm. The scribes, naturally, record it all. Leonor is the star of the ledger. The entries featuring her are longer, more detailed, and oddly poetic. They sometimes note her jewelry, her scent, her remarks about foreign affairs. It is rumored that Alfonso composes his own annotations, revising the official scribal entries at night while Leonor sleeps beside him. Still, he is not faithful, just loyally unfaithful to one more than the others. You find this world confusing. You're unsure who ranks higher, the queen, the mistress, or the man who copies their sleeping arrangements into a vault. At court, conversation dances delicately around this triangle. Nobles speak in euphemisms. The queen's supporters grumble behind fans. Bishops sigh. Alfonso listens to none of them. He fights wars with Morocco, launches crusades against Granada, and returns home to Leonor as if nothing in the world could possibly disapprove. You join him once on campaign. It's dusty, fast, full of trumpets. Alfonso rides in front. His helmet is polished and engraved with a cross and a woman's initials. You're fairly certain it's Leonor's. He gives orders with clarity. Punishes desertion harshly, and fasts before major battles. Soldiers like him. Nobles tolerate him. Enemies fear him. You don't dislike him. But you do notice how every act, every word, fits into a self-written narrative. Alfonso is building not just a kingdom, but a myth, of himself, of Castile, of righteous conquest and perfect romance. The ledgers aren't for posterity. They're for control. And what of Maria? She remains, in Segovia or Valladolid, surrounded by ladies-in-waiting and ignored. But she's not stupid. Nor passive. She writes letters. She sends spies. She gathers alliances. She bides her time, waiting for the man who made her queen to remember he once swore fidelity. He never does. Alfonso is too busy reforming the courts, issuing tax reforms, and debating with churchmen about who gets buried where. He builds chapels and libraries. He orders translations of legal texts. He funds new roads. And still, every night, the ledger grows thicker, but there's a problem he can't record into submission. The plague, yes, that plague. The one that stalks the Mediterranean like a rumor with teeth. Alfonso first hears of it from sailors, then bishops, then terrified peasants. He refuses to panic. He issues proclamations of cleanliness, orders public prayers, and, famously, refuses to flee. He stays. He holds council. He inspects the sick. He believes himself immune, or at least ordained to survive. He does not. He dies in 1350, during the siege of Gibraltar. Not on a battlefield, not in a blaze of glory. But sweating, gasping, and alone, save for a handful of aides too afraid to run. His death is not recorded in his own hand, but the scribes, dutiful as ever, make the final entry, King Alfonso XI. Expired of the plague. In camp. Unaccompanied. Deo volenti, you read that final line twice. His wife, Maria, outlives him, and she strikes back. With Alfonso gone, Leonor has no protection. The queen moves swiftly. She has Leonor imprisoned, then, quietly, but irrevocably, executed. Not for treason. Not even for adultery. Just removed. Erased. Unofficial status has no legal defense when the legal wife takes back the court. The scribes do not record Leonor's death in the same volumes. But someone, you're not sure who, writes in the margin of the final book, in thin faded ink, and so the queen had her night alone at last. You close the volume gently, the Castilian sun sets early, orange and dry. You wander the empty halls of what used to be Leonor's palace. Her perfume has faded. Her tapestries are gone. Only the ink remains, pages and pages of half confession, half control. You're not sure whether Alfonso XI was lecherous, lonely, or just addicted to being noticed, perhaps all of the above. In the next chamber, a court musician rehearses a love song that was once composed in Leonor's honor. You think you recognize the melody. Or maybe it's something you imagined. Late at night, flipping through endless pages of what was essentially the first royal dating app log in history, there is something tragically sincere about Alfonso. He wanted to be loved. By God, by his subjects, by history. And when he couldn't control who loved him, he tried to at least control how it was remembered. You wonder, as you pack your bag and prepare to depart for France, what your own record might read if a royal scribe followed you. Probably, a quiet night. No companions. Slight breeze. Dreamt of fish. Woke up missing someone else's story. You leave the dry roads of Castile behind and cross the Pyrenees into France, where the rain never stops drizzling and the kings never stop worrying. It's not the kind of place where passion lives out loud, it simmers instead, tight-lipped and candlelit, behind stained glass windows and veils of propriety. You walk into a court ruled not by scandal, but by paranoia, pageantry, and powdered silence, and then, into this very silence, comes a king who thinks he is made of glass. His name is Charles VI, but he is not yet the mad, not at first. When he ascends the throne in 1380, he is 12 years old, sweet-faced and surrounded by uncles who smell like incense and silver coins. You meet him later. When he's 20 and already exhausted, the boy king has grown into a man whose face would look noble on a coin, if only it didn't flicker with fear when no one's watching. He wears layers. Of silk, of rules, of expectations. And sometimes, of literal armor, underneath his tunics, just in case, and one day, he breaks. The story goes like this: it's summer, it's hot, and Charles is riding through the forest with his knights. A servant drops a lance. It clangs. Charles freezes. Then draws his sword. And attacks his own men. When he's finally restrained, he doesn't recognize anyone. Not his brother. Not his wife. Not his closest friend. He babbles about being hunted, about betrayal. About how the trees whispered to him, "You are there," weeks later, when the court hushes itself to process what has happened. What's whispered at first becomes undeniable. The king is ill. Not with fever. With something worse. Something that has no name but echoes like a ghost behind every tapestry. Charles enters a new phase of rule. A phase where he believes, with full sincerity, that he is made of glass. He refuses to be touched. He demands iron rods be sewn into his clothing to protect his bones. He orders that no one move quickly around him, lest they shatter him with a gesture. At night, he insists his pages pad the furniture and remove all hard objects from his room, including crucifixes, doorknobs, and the tips of candlesticks. You once see a guard get dismissed for stepping too heavily in the hallway outside the king's room. Despite all this, Charles doesn't abdicate. No one makes him. Instead, the French court adapts. It stretches around his illness like a warped mirror. Regents begin to rule in his name, uncles, cousins, noblemen whose titles come with claws. The Queen, Isabeau of Bavaria, becomes both caretaker and political pawn. you watch as Isabeau navigates court with terrifying elegance. She does not wear her power openly. She laces it into her sleeves, disguises it in charitable works, lets it bloom behind her like a scent only the smart ones can smell. She commissions paintings. She holds salons. She takes lovers, discreetly, but with strategic purpose. One of them is rumored to be the king's brother, Louis of Orleans. Another is possibly a physician. Another may not exist at all. But the whispers gather, Isabeau remains queen through it all, and her influence grows with each of the king's relapses. Every time Charles forgets his name or insists on being kept in a padded cell, another decision gets made in her voice, and the court splits. On one side, the Armagnacs, supporting the queen and her faction, on the other, the Burgundians, led by Charles's cousin, the Duke of Burgundy, who believes the queen is a corrupting force, and also very possibly sleeping her way through France's treasury. Meanwhile, Charles sometimes wanders the halls believing he is St. Louis, sometimes refuses to bathe, sometimes gives away royal lands during manic episodes, and once, famously, forgets he has a wife and children entirely. The scribes call it episodes. The courtiers call it divine punishment. You just call it sad. Because for all the mad kings in history, Charles is the most tragic. Not because he raged, but because he broke gently, like an heirloom. One day, you're summoned to his chamber. The air smells like lavender and wax. He sits by the window, staring at the trees. He says, quietly, I used to be made of flesh. But they replaced me. You don't respond. He isn't really speaking to you. You notice he's wearing gloves. Thick ones. To keep his fingers from snapping off. The rest of the court functions like a church run by actors. Ceremonies continue. Feasts happen. Alliances form and rot. But all around them is this unspoken truth: the king is broken, and the kingdom is cracking with him. You watch as Paris grows tense. The 100 Years' War simmers. Taxes rise. Food prices climb. Nobles hoard while peasants groan. Everyone pretends the king is recovering. But you know. And they know. And he knows. Once, a group of his advisors tried to cheer him with a masquerade ball. You are there. It's called the Ball d'Ardents, the Ball of the Burning Men. It's meant to be silly. 6 courtiers, including the king, dress as wild men in flammable costumes and dance before the queen, but someone brings a torch too close. The costumes catch fire, 4 of the dancers burn to death. One throws himself into a vat of wine to survive. The king is saved only by quick-thinking nobles who smother him in a cloak. The court never recovers from it. Nor does the king. After that, he spends more time away from Paris. He is moved from castle to castle. Sometimes lucid. Often not. He no longer signs documents. His son, the Dauphin, takes over more responsibilities, though he's too young. Isabeau continues to act as the court's pivot. But the factions grow hungrier. France becomes a kingdom ruled by rumor, and yet, Charles lives for 42 years as king. 42. With perhaps half of them spent in various states of delusion. No one dares depose him. There's no mechanism. No precedent. To call him unfit would mean confronting how power works, and no one wants to do that, so France limps along. Toward the end of his life, Charles begins speaking in riddles. Sometimes, they make sense. Other times, they're just sounds. Once, he refers to himself as the last echo of Charlemagne. Another time, he says, I am the night in which the sun forgot its name. No one corrects him. The day he dies, it rains in Paris. Gently. You stand outside Notre Dame as the bells toll. He leaves behind a fractured kingdom, a bitter wife, several traumatized children, and a court so tangled in factions that civil war becomes inevitable. They call him Charles the Mad, but you think that's cruel. He was sick. He was sad. He was trapped in a role he couldn't perform, in a body he didn't trust, in a time with no mercy for the mind. As you leave the French court, someone hands you a shard of glass, allegedly from a window in Charles's favorite chapel. You don't know if it's real. But it catches the light in a strange way, like it remembers everything. Later, in your room, you wrap it carefully in cloth and write a single sentence beneath it: he broke where no one could see. You leave France behind, its cracked mirrors, its glass kings, its perfumed paranoia, and head northeast. The air thickens with old prayers and powdered snow. You are entering the Holy Roman Empire, that shape-shifting beast of kingdoms and duchies and princely egos stitched together with titles so long they wrap around coins twice, and now you meet a man who wears those titles like armor: Sigismund of Luxembourg, King of Hungary, then King of the Romans, then Holy Roman Emperor. Eventually, is not the most brutal monarch, nor the most famous, nor even the most successful. But he is, without contest, one of the most confusing, and in some ways, one of the most fabulously strange. You first encounter Sigismund in the year 1387, when he becomes King of Hungary not by birthright, but by marriage. His wife is Queen Mary of Hungary, who rules in her own name. You're there the night he inherits her throne by surviving an assassination attempt, fending off nobles who don't want him, and locking down his claim with a mixture of bribes, mercenaries, and ecclesiastical side-eye. But this story isn't about battles. It's about obsessions, and Sigismund has many. First, his wardrobe. He doesn't dress like a warrior. He dresses like a Byzantine peacock. Long robes dyed in cinnamon and crimson. Fur-trimmed sleeves that drag behind him like sighs. Shoes so pointed they require little chains to keep from tripping. He wears pearls in his beard. Wears rings on every finger. Wears enough perfume that dogs sneeze when he enters a room. His fashion isn't just vanity. It's a philosophy. He believes beauty confers legitimacy. So he gilds himself like a reliquary, and then there's his obsession with eating. Not food, ritual. Sigismund developed strict dietary codes for his court. No raw onions. No greasy sauces. Everything must be arranged symmetrically. Pomegranates must be cut crosswise. Fish must be deboned by monks. Spoons must never be licked. You are there during one of his fasting periods. For 40 days, the court eats only pears and holy water, except on Sundays, when they're allowed a small bowl of chestnut mash. One night, a guest is offered a roasted goose. The entire hall gasps. Sigismund stands, slowly, and says, "The goose does not symbolize the Trinity. Therefore it must go." The goose is thrown out a window. No one eats meat for another month. You'd think this would make him weak. But Sigismund is surprisingly sturdy. He survives uprisings, plagues, political disasters. His reign in Hungary lasts nearly 50 years. When he finally gets crowned Holy Roman Emperor, he insists on riding a white horse through the streets of Rome wearing armor made from silver leaf and silk brocade, proclaiming that even God respects velvet. But it's not just about outfits and forks. Sigismund is obsessed with order. He sees chaos everywhere, in the church, in the nobility, in the stars. He becomes a crusader not just in name, but in behavior. His campaigns against the Ottomans fail, yes, but in his mind, they're symbolic victories. Every skirmish is a sermon. Every retreat, a parable. You find a notebook in his library with the following written across 5 pages, over and over: "A king is a mirror. If the mirror cracks, the world breaks." Sigismund takes this literally. He once halts court proceedings for 3 days because a servant drops a looking glass. He sends the servant to a monastery. The crack is interpreted by court astrologers as a warning. A comet is sighted the following week. Panic ensues. Several nobles take oaths of chastity. 2 renounce wine. One declares himself a goat, and this is when you begin to notice a pattern. Sigismund collects symbolism like other men collect coins. He assigns meaning to everything. A black cat crossing his path results in the cancellation of treaties. An eclipse means war. A crooked painting is an omen of heresy. He communicates with his ministers using color-coded ribbons tied to their sleeves. One ribbon means attend mass. 2 means prepare troops. 3 means bring me gingerbread. He is obsessed with gingerbread, by the way. It becomes a major export under his reign. You once see an ambassador dismissed for mocking the icing. By 1414, Sigismund is hosting the Council of Constance, a massive church council meant to end the Western Schism, the awkward and deeply embarrassing situation in which the Catholic Church has 3 rival popes at once. You walk the hallways of Constance alongside monks muttering about heresy and prelates arguing over seating charts. Sigismund appears in full imperial garb, his crown nearly toppling off his velvet hat, proclaiming, "There shall be but one pope, one Christendom, and one imperial pastry chef." The council does eventually settle the papal issue. But not without drama. You witness the trial and execution of Jan Hus, a Bohemian reformer who dared to challenge church corruption. Sigismund promises him safe conduct, but the promise is ignored. Hus is burned at the stake. The flames rise high enough to light the emperor's banquet tent. You find Sigismund later that night, standing in the ashes, sipping rose water, and whispering, "I promised him safety. I did not promise him approval." He says this as if it makes everything okay. You realize then that Sigismund is both idealist and opportunist, a man who truly believes in divine order, and is also willing to twist it to keep his seat warm. In private, he writes letters to scholars asking if kings can dream prophecy. In public, he rebrands disasters as moral correctives. Every military loss is God's way of pruning pride. Every famine, a test of Christian discipline. Every betrayal, a trial for the soul. His court becomes a revolving carousel of mystics, cooks, alchemists, and mathematicians. You meet a man who claims to weigh souls. Another who reads futures in pastry folds. One woman is kept in a tower because she claims to hear the voice of saint, and when she sneezes, Sigismund loves it all. It makes him feel in control of the unpredictable. He also has 17 official hats, each with its own mood and administrative function. You once see him swap them 3 times during a single council session. One is for diplomacy. One is for fasting. One is labeled simply, melancholy. By the 1430s, Sigismund is old. Still regal. Still overdressed. Still absolutely exhausting, but something has changed. His dreams have grown darker. You hear him speak to ghosts. He claims that his first wife visits him in his sleep to remind him of failures. He builds a chapel for her memory, then fills it with dried flowers that he insists must be replaced daily, no matter the cost. He no longer trusts mirrors. He bans them from his rooms. He paints his reflection instead, commissioning a series of portraits, each one slightly younger, slightly happier than he is in real life. He says they're for the future. He says he wants people to remember his reign as symmetrical. He dies in 1437, in Znaim, Moravia, alone, save for his valet, who later reports his last words, "The stars have gone crooked. Make them right." He is buried in the Jivarat, in a tomb more opulent than tasteful, designed by an architect who was paid in barrels of honey, embroidery, and a single tooth carved from ivory. His legacy is complicated. He helped end the papal schism. He tried to unite East and West. He failed in many ways, but always with flair, and you remember him not for his triumphs, but for the way he walked through chaos in robes that shimmered like hallucinations. Later, in a quiet room with vaulted ceilings, you unwrap a parchment sketch of Sigismund's ideal throne room, symmetrical, full of mirrors, scented with ginger. At the center is a throne shaped like a sunburst. You wonder if he believed he could rule the heavens. or if he was just trying to arrange the mess of the world into something he could look at without blinking, he organized the chaos until it looked like religion. That's the note you leave behind. The Glass King, Charles VI of France and the Kingdom of Shards, you awake under heavy clouds. The palace around you hums with velvet hush, broken only by the flutter of banners in a courtyard wind that smells like soap and fear. You are in Paris. The year is 1392. The king has gone quiet again. Charles VI of France is 24 when it starts. You know him before that, tall, golden-haired, with the charm of a tapestry prince and the waistline of a man who forgets to eat when not reminded. They call him Le Bien-Aimé, the beloved. A king who wins hearts and tournaments alike. The kind who forgives debts, smiles at babies, and thinks really hard about church music, but something breaks that year. Subtle first, then fast. You are there in the forest of Le Mans when the fever begins. It is supposed to be a campaign, routine justice. A rebellious vassal needs punishing. But in the woods, heat warps the air like a cauldron. There is murmuring among the men. The king rides ahead, eyes wild. A stranger in green whispers something. No one recalls what. But Charles hears it. Freezes, and then suddenly, he screams, draws his sword, and charges his own knights. You scramble back. He slashes at his companions. Cuts one clean through. Another falls from his horse. It's not a brawl. It's a frenzy. A snapping. An undoing. His eyes are unseeing. His mouth foams. His voice yells something about traitors and fire behind the eyes. It takes 12 men to drag him from the saddle. The episode passes. He sleeps for 3 days. Wakes up with no memory. Smiles. Asks for peaches, but you remember, France remembers, and from that day forward, the king is no longer beloved. He is Charles the Mad. For the next 30 years, you wander his court like a dream trapped in velvet. Everything shifts. His illness comes and goes like a tide, sometimes gentle, sometimes dragging corpses. When he's lucid, Charles is tender, reasonable, and fond of storytelling. You listen as he rereads old romances, corrects the troubadours, tries on new gloves. He enjoys hearing about fish markets and pet birds. He once sends a servant to spend 5 days documenting the daily schedule of a particularly well-behaved parrot, but when he breaks, the world becomes sharp and strange. 1 month, he refuses to bathe because he believes water is whispering threats. Another, he forgets who he is and refuses to be called king. Answering only to George, and hiding under tables at the sound of bells, but the worst comes when he begins to believe that he is made of glass. Yes. Glass. You are there when he whispers it to his surgeon, wide-eyed, solemn, I am fragile. I must not shatter. And from then on, everything changes. His clothes are padded. Iron rods are sewn into his tunics to protect him. He forbids anyone from touching him suddenly. He walks stiffly, like a puppet half lifted from its strings. He insists on sitting only on cushions. No wood. No stone. Never stone. Once, when a servant forgets and claps him on the shoulder in greeting, Charles falls screaming to the floor, convinced he's splintered into shards. The court tries to adapt. You are given new rules every week. Don't run near the king, no loud laughter, no red clothing on Tuesdays, don't mention mirrors. Mirrors are a special terror. He cannot bear his reflection. Thinks it is mocking him. Thinks it is a second self, a cruel one. He orders them all removed from the palace. Hundreds of gilded, polished, gleaming symbols of vanity are wrapped in black cloth and hidden like plague victims. The queen tries to soothe him. Isabeau of Bavaria, formidable, intelligent, exhausted. She bears child after child. Tries diplomacy. Wears peace like armor. And watches her husband slip further into a mind full of cracks. you often see her crying behind tapestries. Court life becomes a theater of make-believe. To outsiders, France pretends all is well. The throne sits firm. Taxes are collected. Ceremonies proceed. But you see the patchwork under the gold, power bleeds into factions. The dukes circle like wolves, Burgundy, Orleans, Armagnac. They whisper alliances, spread rumors, plot marriages and murders. Each claims they only want to protect the king. What they really want is his throne. Meanwhile, Charles lives in a dream house. His chambers are filled with silk birds and painted gardens. He will only sleep near yellow curtains. He once speaks to a candlestick for 2 hours, convinced it is Saint Denis. Some days, he doesn't speak at all. You attend the Bal d'Ardence, the infamous fireball. A masquerade held in winter, meant to cheer the king. Charles and several courtiers dress as wild men, covered in pitch and flax to resemble beasts of the forest. They dance for the crowd, howling and leaping, but then someone, possibly the Duke of Orleans, arrives drunk, carrying a torch. The flame catches, the room erupts, the wild men burn alive. You watch it happen. You smell the hair and hear the screams. Only one man escapes by jumping into a vat of wine. Charles survives, barely. But the trauma etches itself into his bones. After that, no more firelight in court. Only candles, placed 3 arms length apart. No more wild costumes. No more music louder than whispers. No more joy. And yet, Charles continues to rule. Sort of, in his lucid phases, he signs laws. Attends councils. He even leads prayers during national processions. For a brief moment, he unites the country to fend off English invasion. People cheer. Merchants light incense, but always, the madness returns. He forgets names. Thinks his son is his brother. Mistakes a dog for a bishop. You are there when he demands a new cathedral be built, not of stone, but of ice. When asked why, he says, so it will melt. Like memory. The project is abandoned. Later, he attempts to ban the color blue, claiming it drowns the air. The court wears green for a month out of caution, when a cardinal defies him. Charles locks him in a music room and plays a lute until the man passes out. France begins to fracture under the weight of his condition. The dukes war openly now. Burgundy has the ear of the queen. Armagnac controls the Dauphin. Orleans gets stabbed in the street. His brains spill into the gutter. A civil war breaks out. The king is barely aware. You sit beside him while messengers report burned villages and broken alliances. Charles smiles faintly, feeding raisins to a cat. In his mind, France is still whole. Still sacred, he once says, all the people are under my crown. I feel their footsteps on my skin. He believes he can hear them. You want to believe it, too, but the blood spills faster now. England returns, teeth bared. Henry V crushes French armies at Agincourt. Half the nobles die. The rest are captured. The country lies stunned. The king? He's folding napkins into flowers. Treaties are signed in his name. The Treaty of Troyes declares the English king heir to the French throne, disinheriting Charles's own son. His signature is scrawled at the bottom, crooked and uncertain. You're there when he affixes the seal. His hands are trembling. His eyes glassy. Someone whispers, he doesn't understand. Someone else replies, it doesn't matter. In the final years, Charles deteriorates. He babbles to birds. Eats only soft bread soaked in honey. Believes the sea is creeping under the palace walls. Sometimes he disappears into corridors, barefoot, convinced he is walking to Jerusalem. Sometimes he forgets how to speak at all, and yet, even now, he is treated as sacred. Servants weep when he enters. Nobles kneel. People touch his robes for healing. The king's body is still holy. Even broken, especially broken, because in some strange way, he embodies the age, a monarch who is both king and void, both crown and crack, a nation suspended between reality and myth. Blood and velvet. War and lullaby, you are there when he dies. In 1422. No one sings. No bells ring. A quiet breath leaves the body. His physician writes only, the glass has fallen. They bury him at Saint Denis, beside kings who never wept, never howled, never believed themselves made of windows, and for decades afterward, children in France play a game called the Glass King, where one child must walk between others, blindfolded, and if they fall, all must gasp and bow. It is a strange little ritual, but in some way, maybe it means they remember, that a king once broke, and the kingdom cracked with him. That madness isn't always rage or ruin, sometimes it's silence. In a mirrored room, sometimes it's a crown no one dares remove. The paper general, George McClellan, and the war he didn't fight, the year is 1861, and you are handed a sword you will never swing. The man holding it is George Brinton McClellan, dashing, brilliant, adored, and very nearly the savior of the Union. He has eyes like polished stone and a jaw that could command battalions. When he rides a horse, crowds cheer as if Christ himself had returned wearing spurs. He is young. He is confident. He is not afraid, and yet, you watch him stall. Postpone. Delay, you watch a war wait for one man to decide he is ready, and in that pause, history takes a breath that nearly breaks a country. Underscore 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 underscore. He begins as a golden boy. McClellan is everything Lincoln is not: trim, polished, charismatic. The soldiers love him. The press deifies him. He reorganizes the shattered Union army after Bull Run, builds it into a gleaming machine. He drills them. Feeds them. Dresses them in blue and ambition. When the ragged, demoralized men of the Army of the Potomac see him ride by, they chant, "Little Mac. Little Mac." With the devotion of saints at a shrine, you ride beside him once, past ranks of soldiers on muddy fields. They lift their hats in worship. McClellan tips his own and says quietly, "They will go wherever I lead." And they would. The tragedy is, he never really leads them anywhere. You sit in war councils where McClellan outlines brilliant plans, complex, precise, geometrically flawless. Every Confederate move anticipated. Every rail line accounted for. He writes thousands of pages of strategy. His maps are masterpieces of cartographic beauty. His supply chains are dreams of efficiency, but then he hesitates. He always wants more troops, more wagons, more guarantees. He believes he is outnumbered, surrounded, outmatched. He inflates Confederate strength by triple, sometimes quadruple. He reports 100,000 rebels when only 40,000 stand against him. You try to explain, "General, they are fewer than we are." He replies, "That's what they want us to think." He sees ghosts in every tree line, cavalry in every field, cannon behind every barn, and so he waits for ideal conditions. Waits for certainty. Waits for the perfect battle. While he waits, men die elsewhere. In Washington, Lincoln watches the delays with increasing despair. You are there when he paces the halls in worn slippers, muttering, "If General McClellan does not want to use the army, I should like to borrow it for a while." He writes letter after letter, urging action. He pleads. He jokes. He cajoles. McClellan ignores him. Once, Lincoln comes to visit him at home, unannounced. He waits in the parlor like an awkward uncle. McClellan comes in, sees him, walks upstairs, and goes to bed without saying a word, it is not insolence. Not exactly, it's something stranger, it's certainty. McClellan believes he knows best. That he is smarter than the president. Smarter than the cabinet. Smarter than everyone. He sees himself not as a servant of the Republic, but its savior. He writes letters calling Lincoln the guerrilla. He calls his superiors imbeciles. He keeps a private diary full of divine comparisons. At one point he writes, "I seem to have become the power of the land." And perhaps, in that moment, he has. In 1862, the war finally moves. McClellan launches the Peninsula Campaign, sailing the Army of the Potomac down the Chesapeake to land near Richmond. It is a brilliant plan: turn the Confederates' flank, take the capital, end the war. It could have worked, it nearly does. You march with him through Virginia's mud-choked lanes, past blossoming orchards and abandoned tobacco farms. You watch towns empty in his path. He captures Yorktown without a fight. Pushes toward the Confederate heartland, but then. Again. He stops, just outside Richmond. He pauses. Convinced the enemy is too strong, he digs in. Builds fortifications. Sends panic telegrams asking for reinforcements. He has the city in his grasp, but refuses to close his fingers. Meanwhile, Robert E. Lee seizes the initiative. The Confederate general, newly appointed, launches audacious counterattacks in what becomes the 7 Days Battles. Lee is outnumbered, undersupplied, and reckless. But McClellan, ever cautious, begins to retreat, despite having nearly double the manpower. Despite holding superior positions. Despite still having Richmond almost within artillery range. You read the casualty lists. Names from Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio. Thousands dead in a fight that could have ended months earlier. You whisper, why not press the attack? McClellan answers you with cold logic, the men are tired. The conditions are poor. I have done all I could. Back in Washington, trust crumbles. Lincoln relieves McClellan of command. Then restores him again after another disaster. The Union is starved for generals. Each failure deepens the need. Each Confederate victory makes the memory of Little Mac feel safer. Familiar, you hear soldiers still say, he kept us fed. He kept us whole. They don't care about strategy. They remember his care, and yet again, McClellan has a chance to change history. Antietam, it is September 1862. A Confederate invasion of the North. Lee's army crosses into Maryland. McClellan intercepts. And this time, fate hands him a miracle. Lee's battle plans fall into Union hands. You are there when they're discovered, wrapped around 3 cigars, left in a field. A full Confederate order of battle. Positions. Timings. Secrets. It is the single greatest intelligence coup of the war, and even then, McClellan hesitates. He waits 18 hours before moving. When the battle comes, it is brutal, especially at places like the Sunken Road and Burnside Bridge. You walk the fields afterward, bloody cornfields and corpse-strewn farms. 23,000 casualties in a single day. It is the bloodiest day in American history, and still McClellan does not pursue Lee as he retreats. Lincoln is livid. You watch him shake with fury, his hat crumpled in his fists. We had them. God help us, we had them. McClellan claims the army needs rest. That he has done enough. That he has driven the enemy back. It is technically true. But winning without ending is not what the nation needs. He is dismissed again. This time for good, but McClellan does not vanish. In 1864, he returns, not in uniform, but in a suit. He runs for president, against Lincoln. You attend the Democratic National Convention. McClellan is their hope. The peace platform promises to end the war. Negotiate with the South. Restore the Union, somehow, without more blood, but the people see through it. They remember Antietam. Remember the slowness. The almosts. Lincoln wins. The war continues. And with Grant, ruthless, unglamorous Grant, the war finally ends. In the quiet years afterward, McClellan fades, he writes memoirs. Defends his decisions. Claims that he saved the army. That without him, the war would have been lost. That caution was wisdom, not weakness. He becomes governor of New Jersey. A ceremonial office, you visit him once in his study. He is older. Still handsome. His hair gone silver. His eyes still cold. He gestures to a painting of himself on horseback. They never understood. I was right to be careful. He doesn't ask if you agree, because deep down, he knows that fear wore the uniform of logic. That doubt masqueraded as calculation. That somewhere, in the marshes of Virginia, in the orchards near Richmond, in the cornfields of Maryland, he left victory unclaimed, and yet. He was no villain, he loved his soldiers. He preserved their lives. He built an army out of ash. He gave shape to Union hopes when they were most fragile, but he could not fight the war that needed fighting. He wanted a war of maneuvers. Of rules. Of glory, but the Civil War was a knife fight in a burning barn, and McClellan couldn't bear the smoke. He remains, in the end, a monument to potential, a general of maps. A commander of parades. A man whose greatness lay not in what he did, but in what he might have done, if only he'd been willing to lose more. The general who would not lose, Ulysses' Grant, and the logic of relentlessness. He arrives in silence, no fanfare, no press, no polished uniform. Just a dusty man on a dusty horse, trousers wrinkled, coat stained with pipe smoke, eyes like spent coals. You hear someone mutter, "That's Grant." As if a war might hinge on such an unimpressive figure, but it will. He does not speak unless spoken to. When he does, the sentences come short and straight, like bullets, and behind his quiet eyes is a single, terrifying resolve: this war ends when the enemy is broken. Not before. You ride with him and realize, this man does not want glory. He does not even want war, he wants to end it. And he will end it by winning. Underscore 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 underscore. Grant's genius is not in grand speeches or elegant theory. He does not draw beautiful maps or build ornate strategy. He sees war not as a game of position, but a contest of wills. He believes, the art of war is simple enough. Find out where your enemy is. Get at him as soon as you can. Strike him as hard as you can, and keep moving on. This is not poetry. This is not the high language of McClellan's dispatches. This is how you beat a rebellion. You watch him first in the West, Shiloh, Vicksburg, Chattanooga. At Shiloh, they say Grant was surprised. They say his camp was almost overrun. But you were there. You saw how, even with blood thick in the mud, even as men screamed and the lines bent, he did not retreat, he regrouped. Reformed. Counterattacked at dawn, and won. At Vicksburg, he starved a city. Laid siege to a fortress no one thought could fall. While generals debated, Grant simply moved, cut off supply lines, took the high ground, and waited. One by one, the defenders crumbled. When Vicksburg fell, the Mississippi belonged to the Union. The Confederacy was split in half, and yet, Grant did not gloat, he just moved on. In 1864, Lincoln gives him command of the entire Union Army. You are in the room when they meet for the first time. Grant stands awkwardly, hat in hand. Lincoln towers over him, but defers to him instantly. There is no vanity in this moment. Only the mutual understanding of men who want to end a war. Lincoln tells him, hold on with a bulldog grip, and chew and choke as much as possible. Grant nods. He is already thinking ahead, already moving toward Richmond. What follows is not a campaign, it is a grindstone. the overland campaign begins in May 1864. Grant brings 120,000 men through Virginia's tangled forests. And he does not stop. The battles are endless, shapeless, ferocious, the wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, you lose track of how many men fall. The air smells of blood and wet wood. In some places, the dead pile 5 deep. At Spotsylvania, soldiers fight hand to hand with bayonets for 20 hours. No one sleeps. The earth is too soft to hold the dead, the press calls Grant a butcher. The public reels. Lincoln stays silent, but you, who ride beside him, see what others miss. Grant is not reckless, he is deliberate, every inch he gains costs dearly, but the South cannot afford to lose inches. He is trading space for attrition, momentum for exhaustion. I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer. He says, and he does, at Cold Harbor, the price is too high. You are there when thousands of Union men charge fortified Confederate lines. Within 12 minutes, over 7,000 are shot down, they lie screaming in the sun, dying without help. You smell burning flesh from the heat. Grant writes in his journal, I have always regretted that the last assault at Cold Harbor was ever made. It is the only admission of personal regret he ever puts to paper, but he does not stop. Where McClellan would have retreated, where Meade would have dug in, Grant does something different. He crosses the James River, he bypasses Lee's defenses entirely, ferries 100,000 men in secrecy, and lays siege to Petersburg, the rail junction that feeds Richmond. It is brilliant, and brutal. The siege of Petersburg lasts 9 months. You pass the days in trenches with rats, watching men waste away under sniper fire. The nights smell of powder and damp soil. Grant never leaves the line. He writes, rides, plans, smokes, he sleeps in a tent beside his men. There are no declarations of glory. Only progress, there are no sweeping victories. Only pressure, he tightens the noose, inch by inch, around Lee's army. At last, in April 1865, the line breaks. You ride with Grant through the Virginia countryside as Lee's forces flee west. They are gaunt, starving, sick. Grant does not gloat. He does not parade, he sends messages to Lee, there is no need for further bloodshed. You are with him at Appomattox Courthouse, April 9th. Lee arrives in full dress uniform, sword polished, boots gleaming. Grant comes in dusty field clothes, mud on his boots. They speak alone. When they emerge, the war is over. Grant offers generous terms, parole, provisions, dignity. He writes no victory speech. He does not raise his voice. He simply walks away, hat low over his eyes. He could have been president. And eventually, he will be, but in that moment, standing in the spring sunlight, Grant is something more. He is a man who finished what others began. You think back to Lincoln's words, Grant fights. It wasn't praise. It was a revelation. So many generals had maneuvered, hesitated, written letters and made excuses. Only Grant fought. And kept fighting, until the war was done, but it cost him. You see it in his face. The exhaustion. The weight. Grant bears every dead soldier on his back. He does not speak of it. He drinks sometimes, more than he should. He is never fully at ease, but he won the war that had to be won, not with genius, with persistence, and yet the irony, when the war ends, he becomes a poor president. Too trusting. Too passive. His administration is riddled with scandal. He is loyal to friends who betray him. He stumbles through politics the way he never did through war. You wonder, was all his fire burned out at Appomattox? Later in life, nearly broke and dying of cancer, he writes his memoirs to save his family from poverty. He finishes them days before he dies. They sell more copies than any book in America that year, because people remember, because no matter what came after, Grant was the man who kept going when no one else would. You recall how Lincoln once said, I can't spare this man. He fights. And in the end, that's all the war ever needed, someone who wouldn't stop. The king who lost his head, Charles I, and the anatomy of a bad breakup. you're standing in a cold London street, watching a scaffold being built, timber thuds on timber. Nails groan. Men hammer without speaking, above it all looms the grey, sullen bulk of Whitehall Palace, and inside, the King of England dresses carefully, as if preparing for a wedding, only this is not a union, it's a severing. Charles Stuart, King of England, Ireland, and Scotland, is going to die tomorrow, and it's his own fault. He wasn't always doomed. You met him when he was still just Prince Charles, the quiet one, the second son, the stammering boy trailing behind his older brother Henry. Then Henry died. And Charles inherited not just the crown, but a festering political swamp. He walked into rule like a man stepping into silk slippers only to find they're full of snakes. The trouble is simple on paper. Parliament wants power. Charles wants divine right, he believes God put him on the throne. That king's answer only to heaven. That compromise is weakness. Parliament believes in checks and balances. Charles believes in royal will. This goes about as well as you'd expect. You watch him begin his reign in 1625 like a man trying to play chess with a table of angry badgers. His first parliament refuses to grant him money. He dissolves it, his second does the same. He dissolves that one. 2, eventually, Charles just stops calling them all together. He rules alone for 11 years. Historians will call it the personal rule. You call it the silent tantrum. He raises taxes without consent. Revives long-dead feudal fees. Fines nobles for not being knighted. Invents new shipping taxes. When people complain, he replies with courtly silence, or has them imprisoned. But he doesn't just meddle with money. Charles has opinions. About religion. About robes. About candles and altars and incense and the way priests should wear their sleeves. He tries to make the Church of England look more Catholic. Not Catholic, he insists, just beautiful. The Puritans are not convinced. Neither are the Scots. You're there when he tries to impose the English Book of Common Prayer on the Scottish Church. A woman throws a stool at the minister's head. Riots break out. Charles is furious. He sends an army. It loses. He sends another. It loses again. He's run out of money, out of men, out of options. Now he has to do the one thing he hates most, call Parliament. You feel the mood shift the moment they assemble in 1640. This is not a Parliament that wants to bargain. This is a Parliament that wants revenge, and not just for taxes, for 11 years of silence. For imprisonments. For divine right arrogance. For the war against the Scots. For Charles's closest advisers, especially one, the Earl of Strafford, they execute Strafford. The king weeps, then Parliament begins tearing apart the royal prerogative brick by brick, limiting his power, seizing control of the army, passing reforms he cannot veto. Charles plays polite. Smiles. Waits, then tries something bold. He walks into Parliament, sword at his side, and tries to arrest 5 members of the Commons. It is unprecedented. It is illegal. It is stupid. They're already gone. He looks around the chamber. Empty chairs. Furious silence. He mutters, the birds are flown. And leaves. Everyone knows. There is no going back now. Civil war begins. You ride with Charles's royalist army, the Cavaliers, dashing nobles with feathered hats, silken banners, and a deep sense of superiority. They face the Roundheads, Puritan militias, strict, severe, poorly dressed, and terrifyingly disciplined. At first, it's a stalemate. But then a new force emerges, Oliver Cromwell and his new model army. They are efficient, ruthless, and indifferent to royal pageantry. You watch as one by one, royalist strongholds fall. Nobles defect. Generals quit, Charles is captured, and then things get really strange. Charles negotiates, then escapes, then gets captured again, then starts a second civil war from captivity. This, it turns out, is one betrayal too many. Parliament is done, the army is done. Cromwell and his officers make a decision so radical, so unthinkable, it staggers even their allies. They will put the King of England on trial. You are in the courtroom in January 1649. Charles refuses to recognize the legitimacy of the court. He refuses to plead. He insists no court on earth can try a divinely appointed monarch. The judges ignore him. He tries to speak. They silence him. He tries to dismiss the proceedings. They pass sentence anyway. He is condemned to death, for tyranny, treason, and waging war against his own people. And now you are in Whitehall, on the morning of January 30th. Charles wakes early. Dresses carefully. Black velvet, white lace. He tucks his long hair under a cap, so the axe will have a clear stroke. He asks for a second shirt. It's cold, and he doesn't want to shiver, lest it be thought fear. He walks steadily through the banqueting house, beneath the painted ceiling glorifying kings. Out onto the scaffold, the crowd watches in dead silence. He speaks, "I am the King of England. I am the servant of God." A subject may not judge his sovereign. The executioner kneels. Asks forgiveness. Charles gives it, then kneels himself. The axe falls in one clean stroke, a single groan from the crowd, and then silence. You think of all the kings who fought wars and survived. All the tyrants who ruled longer and died in bed, but Charles believed too much in the purity of kingship. He would not bend, so he broke. What follows is something England has never seen, a republic. No more kings. No more crowns. For 11 years, the country is ruled by Cromwell and then his son, but it is grey and joyless. Art dies. Theatre is banned. Funerals last longer than weddings. Eventually, the people decide maybe kings aren't so bad after all, as long as they know their place. In 1660, Charles's son, Charles II, is restored to the throne. He rides into London to cheers and church bells. He is witty, charming, decadent. He never forgets what happened to his father, and he never lets the crown forget it, either. You walk past the banqueting house one last time. There's no plaque. No marker. Just a blank spot on the wall where the scaffold once stood. The executioner's name was never recorded. No one wants to remember that England once killed a king, but you remember, you were there. Queen Christina of Sweden, the virgin who fled the throne. You wake to snow, not flakes. Not flurries. Not poetic dustings. This is Swedish snow, thick, unforgiving, and constant. It piles against the palace like siege work. It crunches under royal boots, silences cannon, smothers scandal. Inside Stockholm's royal chambers, the queen rises early, long before her court. Her sheets are tangled. Her writing desk is messy. Her sword, yes, sword, leans against a stack of books. This is Queen Christina of Sweden, and you are about to witness one of the strangest exits in royal history. Christina was born in 1626, in the middle of a storm, literally and politically. Sweden was at war, as usual. Her father, King Gustavus Adolphus, was off fighting Catholic armies in Germany. Her mother gave birth during an icy tempest and, upon seeing the child's wiry limbs and strange silence, thought she'd birthed a monster. Even worse, they thought she was a boy at first, then a miracle, she lived. You're there when Gustavus dies in battle. The corpse is barely cold before a 3-person regency takes over. Christina is only 6, but the crown is already hers, a girl king in training. Instead of needlework, she learns Latin. Instead of ballads, she recites Livy. By 14, she's out debating grown men. By 18, she's refusing to marry any of them. You observe her daily routine, rising before dawn. Sword drills, philosophy debates, letter-writing marathons, and afternoons with Descartes. Yes, that Descartes, who she invites to Sweden to teach her how to think. He dies shortly after arriving. The palace is too cold. She wears men's boots. Refuses corsets. Doesn't like lace. She gives herself nosebleeds by reading too much. She sneaks into theological lectures and gets into heated arguments with bishops. Foreign ambassadors are charmed, baffled, and occasionally terrified. You watch her host salons with philosophers, stage Greek tragedies, and arrange private fencing matches in the gallery, and yet, she is queen, she rules. For real, but she's restless. Sweden, in her eyes, is a land of frost and rigidity, bound by Lutheran dogma and military pride. Her ministers want her to marry, she refuses. They ask her to name an heir, she shrugs. The court gossips endlessly. About her walk, her voice, her habits, her friendships, especially one, Ebba Sperry, her closest companion, called La Belle Comtesse. Christina calls her bedfellow, my delight, my beloved. The letters are intense, and frequent, but it's not just romance she's evasive about. It's everything. Christina begins to withdraw, she avoids council meetings, she stages dramatic absences from court, she paints herself as misunderstood, above politics, yearning for freedom. She starts plotting her escape. You're there in 1654, on the morning of her abdication, a glittering crowd gathers in Uppsala Castle, nobles packed into the grand hall, uneasy. On the dais, Christina appears, wearing her crown, her scepter, her orb. She looks radiant. Then, one by one, she hands them all back. Crown gone, scepter gone, gloves, robe, chain, ring. She strips herself of monarchy like a snake shedding its skin. When it's done, she's no longer Queen of Sweden. She is Christina, citizen of nowhere, and she smiles. That very night, you slip away with her, disguised as a man, riding hard through southern Sweden. No guards, no servants, no entourage. She vanishes from her own kingdom like a wraith. Within days, the rumors fly: madness, illness, pregnancy. But the truth is far stranger. Christina is headed to Rome, and to Catholicism. Her conversion, when it comes, is spectacular. Christina arrives in Italy in 1655, she enters Rome to fireworks, music, and cheering crowds. She is celebrated like a rock star, a Protestant queen who renounced her throne for the Pope. You walk beside her through the streets of the Eternal City as garlands fall from balconies and priests weep. She receives a personal blessing from Pope Alexander VII. She is given a palace. She is a queen without a crown, but richer than ever in influence. Her Roman years are eccentric. She fills her new court with artists, musicians, and philosophers. She hosts salons, founds academies, patronizes opera, studies alchemy. She lectures cardinals about Neoplatonism, tells off the Inquisition, once threatens to have a servant executed, then writes a tragic poem about it. Her private life remains a topic of endless speculation. A royal rebel, they called her many things: a philosopher, a heretic, a lesbian, a genius, a madwoman, a saint, but mostly, she was a woman who refused to play the part she was given. You remember her not for her throne, but for how she gave it up, not out of fear, but out of freedom. King Ludwig II of Bavaria, the Swan King and his castles in the clouds. You awaken beneath silk canopies and blue-painted stars. A painted swan floats above you. Gold filigree catches the candlelight. Somewhere nearby, a harp plays itself, or seems to. This is no ordinary bedchamber. This is Neuschwanstein, a palace of impossible turrets and echoing halls, deep in the Bavarian Alps, and its master is not quite sane. You rise quietly. Ludwig II might be watching. He was born in 1845, a child with long eyelashes and a dreamy stare. The court whispered that he was too delicate, too quiet, too strange. He preferred books to boys, fairy tales to fencing. By age 10, he was obsessed with Richard Wagner, the composer of thunderous myths. Forbidden Love and Dying Gods. Ludwig didn't just enjoy Wagner's music. He lived inside it. At 18, he became King of Bavaria. You sit stiffly on the velvet benches as the boy king is crowned. He's tall, elegant, silent. His father is barely buried. His ministers hope for a strong leader. Instead, they get Ludwig, the king who refuses to rule, won't sit for portraits, and spends his nights sketching moonlit castles with towers that pierce the clouds. He doesn't marry, not even close. You watch as he becomes betrothed, once, to his cousin Sophie. They exchange letters filled with swans and sighs. Then Ludwig breaks it off. Later he'll write that his heart was torn, that he sought purity and grace above flesh. He means men, mostly, but also, he means fantasy. He starts building, not just homes, worlds, first Neuschwanstein, his homage to Lohengrin, the Knight of the Swan. Turrets, balconies, and murals inspired by Wagner's operas, then Linderhof, a glittering Versailles-like jewel box, where mirrors reflect chandeliers into infinity, then Herrenchium Sea, a palace on an island, half completed, with a hall of mirrors more opulent than Louis XIV. You visit each one, in turn. Each more elaborate. Each more isolated, and each more empty. Ludwig builds for no one, he dines alone. In mirrored rooms. With imaginary guests, sometimes, he pretends to be a medieval knight. Other times, a Moorish caliph. He commissions stage sets for rooms that are never used, he designs a cave, complete with artificial moonlight, for listening to Wagner in private. His ministers grow concerned, the costs spiral, he borrows money from foreign banks, mortgages palaces, and sells royal lands. He doesn't care, he never does. You see him drift through the halls of Neuschwanstein in slippers, humming opera, reciting lines from Schiller. Sometimes he vanishes into the mountains for days. With only servants and horses, he speaks to stars, he listens to ghosts. Wagner, for his part, is delighted. At first, the two exchange passionate letters. You are the angel who saves me, Wagner writes. Ludwig replies with desperate admiration, calling him master, savior, dearest friend. You catch glimpses of them riding together, whispering behind closed doors, arguing over Tristan and Isolde. Then it sours. Wagner asks for more money, Ludwig grows possessive, eventually, they part ways. But Ludwig never stops believing. By 1886, his debts are astronomical, his court is near revolt. They can't remove a king. Can they? You follow the whispers as doctors are summoned, psychiatrists who have never met Ludwig. They declare him insane, paranoid, delusional, dangerous. The diagnosis comes in absentia. The night they come for him, you're in Neuschwanstein. He does not fight, he steps down gracefully. He says, I will gladly retire to private life. They take him to Berg Castle, near Lake Starnberg. There's a stillness to him now, like the silence before the final chord of an opera. 2 days later, he is found dead in the lake. The doctor who declared him insane lies beside him, both face down in the water. No struggle, no explanation, no witnesses. Was it suicide? Was it murder? Did Ludwig walk willingly into the lake to drown among swans and dreams? No one knows. The mystery only deepens the legend. You return to Neuschwanstein. It is open now, to the public. Tourists shuffle past golden ceilings and velvet drapes. They snap photos of a throne room that never had a throne. You pause before the painted swan above the staircase. This was a palace meant for no one. Or perhaps for gods, a dream built by a man who refused the real world. Ludwig ruled less than 2 decades, he never led an army. Never sired heirs. Never completed a single castle, but today, he is remembered more than any Bavarian monarch before or after. Because he dreamed louder than the Section 14, James VI and I, witch hunts, male favorites, and the art of looking sideways. The wind off the North Sea is cruel. It gnaws through your cloak as you trudge toward the stone walls of a grim Scottish fortress. The year is 1590, and inside, a wiry young king with nervous eyes is flipping through a leather-bound book of demonic symbols. His name is James VI of Scotland, soon to become James I of England, and he's about to take his obsession with witches, prophecy, and pretty boys to a whole new level. You tighten your cloak. This one's going to be complicated. James is a bundle of contradictions in a frilly collar, born in 1566 to Mary, Queen of Scots, and raised largely without her. Since she was imprisoned when he was just a year old, he grew up both spoiled and insecure. You watch him fidget as tutors drill him in Latin and Reformation theology while courtiers bow and snicker behind lace gloves. He's clever, verbose, painfully earnest, and he hates being alone. He will spend most of his life surrounding himself with 2 types of people, men who flatter him, and women he doesn't quite know what to do with. You catch your first real glimpse of James in his early 20s, pacing his chamber while mumbling lines from the Book of Revelation. He's just married Anne of Denmark, a political match, awkward but necessary. Their courtship had all the chemistry of a tax audit. She spoke barely any Scots. He preferred theological debate over flirtation. When she gets stranded at sea on her way to Scotland, James does ride out to fetch her himself, but some suspect that was more about good PR than passion. Still, they have several children together, which doesn't stop the gossip, because James, well, he loves men, not in a discreet, Renaissance code sort of way. No, you watch him practically cling to his favorites, writing gushy letters, granting them titles, and, in one case, literally kissing one in public, his most famous favorite. George Villiers, later Duke of Buckingham, think, movie star looks, dazzling wit, and a talent for getting exactly what he wants. James calls him sweet child and wife in private notes. He showers him with diamonds and offices. When Parliament protests, James shrugs and says, Christ had his John. And I have my George. You sip your wine. That's certainly one way to put it, but James isn't all swans and hand-holding. He has a much darker obsession, which is, in 1590, after his ship nearly sinks during his voyage home from Denmark, James becomes convinced it was the work of sorcery. He launches the North Barrack witch trials, where dozens, mostly women, are tortured, accused of flying through storms, kissing the devil's rear, and melting ships with demonic breath. You wince as he personally oversees interrogations. He even writes a book, Demonology, which becomes a manual for witch hunters across Britain. Historians still argue whether James was sincere in his fear or simply playing to a paranoid public. Either way, hundreds suffer. You can't help but notice how this deeply insecure king finds comfort in control, whether over lovers or enemies, sermons or sorcery. James also has a knack for PR. He commissions a new translation of the Bible, the now famous King James Version. He styles himself the King of Great Britain, a unifier, a divine monarch, but privately, he battles gout, chronic insecurity, and a body most painters had to flatter aggressively. You follow him to a banquet at Whitehall, where he gestures grandly through a cloud of roast swan steam and perfume. He talks too long, his jokes fall flat, everyone laughs anyway, that's the job. He takes his favorites hunting. He lets them borrow royal clothing. You see Buckingham wearing the king's gloves, his perfume, even his jewelry. They ride together, dine together, sleep. Well, that's the real debate. Historians still argue whether James's relationships with his male favorites were physically intimate or just emotionally intense. But you've seen the letters. They drip with longing. His relationship with Parliament, tense at best. He believes in the divine right of kings, that his authority comes directly from God. Parliament disagrees. He lectures them. They cut his funding. He sulks, but ultimately, James is more scholar than soldier. He hates bloodshed. Unlike his son Charles, James avoids civil war by sheer charm and compromise. Barely. As he grows older, you see him retreat more and more into ritual, scripture, and the velvet shadows of court favorites. His appetite expands. His legs swell. His doctors apply cures involving leeches and barley water. You pass him in a corridor one evening, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, muttering about omens and divine judgment. It's hard to tell where the Bible ends and his paranoia begins, and yet, he's not a terrible king. He keeps England relatively peaceful. He survives multiple plots, including the gunpowder plot of 1605, when Guy Fawkes and friends try to blow up Parliament. You were there, remember? Standing in the cold cellar with guards when they find barrels of powder and that awkward man with the mustache. James spins it into divine vindication. A triumph. A sermon. He always preferred words to swords. By the time he dies in 1625, he's ruled Scotland for nearly 6 decades and England for over 20. He leaves behind a mixed legacy, a divided kingdom, a famous Bible, and rumors, so many rumors, about his lovers, about his demons, about a king who talked to God but maybe just wanted to be loved. You exit quietly through a side door at Hampton Court. Outside, the trees bend in the breeze. You hear someone laughing faintly, a young man, maybe Buckingham himself, telling a joke too naughty for chapel, and you wonder, if James had lived in another age, one less filled with witch hunts, forced marriages, and whispered disgust, would he still have needed all those castles, all those silks, all those elaborate lies, or could he have just been and built monuments not to power, but to imagination. James VI and I, witch hunts, male favorites, and the art of looking sideways, the wind off the North Sea is cruel. It gnaws through your cloak as you trudge toward the stone walls of a grim Scottish fortress. The year is 1590, and inside, a wiry young king with nervous eyes is flipping through a leather-bound book of demonic symbols. His name is James VI of Scotland, soon to become James I of England, and he's about to take his obsession with witches, prophecy, and pretty boys to a whole new level. You tighten your cloak. This one's going to be complicated. James is a bundle of contradictions in a frilly collar, born in 1566 to Mary, Queen of Scots, and raised largely without her, since she was imprisoned when he was just a year old. He grew up both spoiled and insecure. You watch him fidget as tutors drill him in Latin and Reformation theology while courtiers bow and snicker behind lace gloves. He's clever, verbose, painfully earnest, and he hates being alone. He will spend most of his life surrounding himself with two types of people, men who flatter him, and women he doesn't quite know what to do with. You catch your first real glimpse of James in his early 20s, pacing his chamber while mumbling lines from the Book of Revelation. He's just married and of Denmark, a political match, awkward but necessary. Their courtship had all the chemistry of a tax audit. She spoke barely any Scots. He preferred theological debate over flirtation. When she gets stranded at sea on her way to Scotland, James does ride out to fetch her himself, but some suspect that was more about good PR than passion. Still, they have several children together, which doesn't stop the gossip, because James, well, he loves men, not in a discreet, Renaissance code sort of way. No, you watch him practically cling to his favorites, writing gushy letters, granting them titles, and, in one case, literally kissing one in public, his most famous favorite. George Villiers, later Duke of Buckingham, think, movie star looks, dazzling wit, and a talent for getting exactly what he wants. James calls him sweet child and wife in private notes. He showers him with diamonds and offices. When Parliament protests, James shrugs and says, Christ had his John. And I have my George. You sip your wine. That's certainly one way to put it, but James isn't all swans and hand-holding. He has a much darker obsession, which is, in 1590, after his ship nearly sinks during his voyage home from Denmark, James becomes convinced it was the work of sorcery. He launches the North Barrack witch trials, where dozens, mostly women, are tortured, accused of flying through storms, kissing the devil's rear, and melting ships with demonic breath. You wince as he personally oversees interrogations. He even writes a book, Demonology, which becomes a manual for witch hunters across Britain. Historians still argue whether James was sincere in his fear or simply playing to a paranoid public. Either way, hundreds suffer. You can't help but notice how this deeply insecure king finds comfort in control, whether over lovers or enemies, sermons or sorcery. James also has a knack for PR. He commissions a new translation of the Bible, the now famous King James Version. He styles himself the King of Great Britain, a unifier, a divine monarch, but privately. He battles gout, chronic insecurity, and a body most painters had to flatter aggressively. You follow him to a banquet at Whitehall, where he gestures grandly through a cloud of roast swan steam and perfume. He talks too long, his jokes fall flat, everyone laughs anyway. That's the job. He takes his favorites hunting. He lets them borrow royal clothing. You see Buckingham wearing the king's gloves, his perfume, even his jewelry. They ride together, dine together, sleep. Well, that's the real debate. Historians still argue whether James's relationships with his male favorites were physically intimate or just emotionally intense, but you've seen the letters. They drip with longing. His relationship with Parliament, tense at best. He believes in the divine right of kings, that his authority comes directly from God. Parliament disagrees. He lectures them. They cut his funding. He sulks, but ultimately, James is more scholar than soldier. He hates bloodshed. Unlike his son Charles, James avoids civil war by sheer charm and compromise. Barely. As he grows older, you see him retreat more and more into ritual, scripture, and the velvet shadows of court favorites. His appetite expands. His legs swell. His doctors apply cures involving leeches and barley water. You pass him in a corridor one evening, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, muttering about omens and divine judgment. It's hard to tell where the Bible ends and his paranoia begins. And yet, he's not a terrible king. He keeps England relatively peaceful. He survives multiple plots, including the gunpowder plot of 1605. When Guy Fawkes and friends try to blow up Parliament, you were there, remember, standing in the cold cellar with guards when they find barrels of powder and that awkward man with the mustache. James spins it into divine vindication. A triumph. A sermon. He always preferred words to swords. By the time he dies in 1625, he's ruled Scotland for nearly 6 decades and England for over 20. He leaves behind a mixed legacy, a divided kingdom, a famous Bible, and rumors, so many rumors, about his lovers, about his demons, about a king who talked to God but maybe just wanted to be loved. You exit quietly through a side door at Hampton Court. Outside, the trees bend in a breeze. You hear someone laughing faintly, a young man, maybe Buckingham himself, telling a joke. Too naughty for chapel. And you wonder, if James had lived in another age, one less filled with witch hunts, forced marriages, and whispered disgust, would he still have needed all those castles, all those silks, all those elaborate lies, or could he have just been Jean Cocteau, smoke, mirrors, and the poet who turned himself into a myth? The door opens on smoke, always smoke. Cigarette curling in a long, aristocratic hand. Shadows pool on the marble floor like spilled ink. You're in 1920s Paris, and Jean Cocteau is performing again. Not for a stage, or a camera, yet, but for you. Even when alone, Jean never stops performing, a poet, a playwright, a filmmaker, a dandy, a liar, a boy who never really grew up, his greatest work. Himself, he was born in 1889, just as Paris was exhaling from the Belle Époque and bracing for modernity. His father, a lawyer and amateur painter, shot himself when Jean was 9. No note. No explanation. That absence would echo through Cocteau's life like a ghost in silk slippers. He found comfort in illusion early. In costumes. In shadows on the wall. You watch him drawing endless chalk silhouettes on a boarding school blackboard while the other boys jeer. They call him sissy, call him fey, call him strange. He prefers strange. By the time he's 20, Cocteau is hosting masked balls, publishing poems, and circulating through the salons of Paris like a cat dipped in perfume. You trail him through Montparnasse, past drunken cubists and sweating surrealists. He kisses hands, argues about form, throws tantrums over dinner. At 23, he's crowned the frivolous prince of the French poets. He hates that. He wants to be serious. He just can't help being decorative. Then, World War I happens, and nothing is decorative anymore. You watch him go to the front, not as a soldier, but as an observer, clinging to the edges of carnage, sketching ambulance drivers and crumpled flags. War unsettles him, but he returns with a hunger for greatness, for danger, for immortality, and most of all, for boys. Jean Cocteau doesn't fall in love gently. He crashes into it. With Raymond Radiguet, a teenage literary prodigy with satyr's eyes and cruel intelligence, Jean is obsessed. Radiguet is elusive, talented, charming, and perhaps manipulative. Their relationship is a tangle of mentorship, erotic tension, and creative rivalry. Jean nurtures him, worships him, writes him letters full of longing and despair. Then Radiguet publishes a brilliant novel, gets engaged to a woman, and promptly dies of typhoid at 20. Cocteau is shattered. You find him sobbing into a velvet pillow, high on opium, quoting Racine and cursing the gods. The grief never quite leaves. That's when Cocteau dives headfirst into everything. He collaborates with Stravinsky, Satie, and Picasso. He writes The Infernal Machine, a retelling of Oedipus with lipstick and gunpowder. He stages ballets that scandalize and confuse. And then, there's the cinema. In 1930, Cocteau releases The Blood of a Poet, a fever dream of surreal images, a talking statue, a man walking through a mirror, opium clouds, angels with boxing gloves. You sit in the smoky theater, The audience around you is stunned. Some applaud. Others hiss, "It's too much, too weird, too queer, too ahead of its time, exactly how Jean likes it." He sees film not as narrative but as alchemy. To film a kiss, he says, is to turn an act of flesh into an act of light. He isn't interested in telling stories. He's interested in haunting you. During the German occupation of France in World War II, Cocteau stays put, he stages plays. Dines with collaborators. Is accused, later, of fraternizing with the enemy, but you were there, you saw how grey those years were. He tries to protect his Jewish friends. Tries to survive. Tries to pretend the war is just another costume party with very bad lighting. He emerges with his reputation bruised, but intact, mostly. In 1946, he creates his masterpiece, La Belle et la Bête, Beauty and the Beast. You're on set. The corridors are candlelit. The costumes shimmer with cobwebs. Jean Marais, Cocteau's new lover and muse, plays the beast with aching eyes and slow, sensual movements. This is fairy tale as fever dream, cursed roses, mirrored hallways, a hand that smokes when it opens doors. Jean tells the crew, we must treat it not like a children's story, but like sacred ritual. And you feel it in your bones. Marais becomes his new obsession, the camera loves him. Cocteau loves him more. They live together, argue constantly, write letters when they're in the same apartment. Jean turns him into myth, casting him as Orpheus, as Apollo, as death itself. The world watches, and Jean watches the world watching him. As he ages, Cocteau begins to paint on walls, napkins, ceilings, anything he can reach. You walk through a chapel he decorates in the south of France. There are angels with lipstick. Christs with eyeliner. Nude boys drifting among flowers, sacrilege, maybe, but beautiful, in a way that makes your heart ache. He's asked once if he believes in God, he replies, of course. But I believe God is the greatest of all illusions. You sit beside him in his final days, he's thinner now. Pale. Still smoking, always smoking, he tells you, I only ever wrote one story. The story of a boy who fell in love with a mirror. Jean Cocteau dies in 1963, reportedly just hours after hearing of the death of his friend Edith Piaf. He leaves behind dozens of plays, several haunting films, poems that slip between dimensions, and a persona so finely constructed it became a masterpiece of its own. Today, Cocteau is often remembered as that eccentric French guy with the fancy drawings. But you were there, you saw the grief, the passion, the ache for transcendence. He wasn't just an artist. He was a medium. He let the spirits of myth, music, desire, and death pass through him, and left behind a trail of smoke and gold dust. You exit the chapel as dusk falls, the sea murmurs. A cigarette smolders in a broken ashtray, a shadow on the wall turns, briefly, into the shape of a poet, then vanishes. You blink as the echoes of Pedro's red-ink tyranny fade into the twilight. But before you leave Iberia entirely, there's one final flicker worth catching. A minor king in name, but a major footnote in the grand chronicle of medieval absurdity, Ferdinand I of Aragon. Not so much perverted as, well, excessively ceremonial. Ferdinand reportedly refused to bathe without a priest present, lest his nakedness offend the celestial order. His court had so many minor saints' days, confessionals, and flagellation routines that diplomats started bringing extra notebooks just to keep track. It said he once paused an execution mid-sentence to debate whether the condemned man should first receive a sermon about modesty. You imagine him now, sitting rigid in a velvet chair, while a court chaplain sprinkles holy water over his bath bucket and recites Latin verses to his feet. A breeze blows through the open shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a lute player stops mid-note, unsure if this is a religious service or a plumbing emergency, and yet, for all his sanctimony, Ferdinand's court employed one of the most famously scandalous jesters of the century, a one-eyed, sharp-tongued Moor who kept a running tally of court hypocrisies on a scroll he wore tied to his ankle. No one dared read it, until, of course, someone did. Cue the scandal, the arrests, the quiet exile. And the awkward realization that the jester had been mostly accurate, so yes, the holy and the profane often shared hallways. The more rules kings wrote, the more they found themselves bending them. And if they weren't bending them for love or lust, they bent them for fear, vanity, or simply to hear the sound of their own commands, which, to be fair, is as royal as it gets. Elagabalus, the teen emperor who ruled Rome like a drag show gone wrong, c. 203 to 222 CE, it's midnight in Rome, and the city smells like crushed roses and burnt offerings. You're following flickering torches down a corridor lined with marble eunuchs. The palace doors swing open, and there he is, draped in silk, painted like a god, holding a golden mirror in one hand and a boy's face in the other. Elagabalus has arrived, and he is not here for moderation. Born Varius Avitus Bassianus in the Roman province of Syria, he wasn't supposed to be emperor. He was just a priest. A very pretty priest. 13 years old. Worshipping a sun god no Roman had ever heard of, Elagabal, whose name he would eventually claim as his own. He served the god on a mountaintop wearing eyeliner, golden robes, and a crown of rubies shaped like flames. Rome didn't see him coming. You wake one morning to find the emperor dead and the boy god on the throne. He's 14, the Senate blinks, he doesn't speak much Latin. He doesn't care for military matters. He thinks the Roman gods are old and ugly, and his first imperial act, replacing Jupiter with his own foreign sun deity, he drags the sacred stone of Elagabalus from Syria to Rome in a chariot pulled by naked slaves. And then, things get weird. The marriages begin. Elagabalus marries a Vestal virgin, something so blasphemous it makes senators faint into their wine. When asked why, he explains, the union of a priest and priestess will birth divine children. The gods are not consulted. He divorces her 2 months later and marries again. Then again. Then again. At one point, he claims to have had 5 wives and possibly more husbands, because Elagabalus doesn't just experiment with power, he experiments with everything. The banquets are legendary. You receive a golden invitation wrapped in peacock feathers. When you arrive, you're seated beside a dwarf, a eunuch, and a philosopher in chains. The food? Flamingo tongues, honey-glazed dormice, ostrich brains stuffed with pearls. One guest is drowned in rose petals, accidentally, they say. Another wakes up to find their clothes sewn shut and eyebrows shaved off. You sit very still. Elagabalus smiles, his sexuality. A revolution in gold sandals. The emperor doesn't just enjoy men. He parades his favorites through the streets in jewels and lip paint. He marries one publicly. He whispers he'd like to be called empress, not emperor. One lover, the charioteer Hierocles, is given the title husband of the emperor. Elagabalus insists on being beaten like a Roman wife to feel feminine. Another lover is Zodicus, an athlete famed for his endowments. Elagabalus makes him Praetorian prefect, commander of the elite guard, for a single night of spectacular sex. The next day, he has him exiled. You start to notice a pattern. He offers rewards to the surgeon who can give him a vagina. Yes, you read that correctly. He promises gold to anyone who can help him transition, though the word doesn't yet exist. He prays for menstruation. For pregnancy. For transformation. He claims the sun god Elagabal has promised him divine womanhood. In the marble corridors of the palace, he walks in jewels and veils. Calling himself the bride of Elagabal, the Roman elite are horrified. He worships with orgies. You are summoned at midnight to a ritual. Incense chokes the air. Dancers move in circles, naked and painted with ash. In the center, the emperor, glittering like a fallen star, chants in Aramaic. Priests copulate beneath animal skins. Blood is spilled. Elagabalus weeps. He calls it divine ecstasy. You call it something else. He appoints priests based on beauty. Every temple begins to look like a modeling agency. Sacrifices are selected by breast symmetry. Public liturgies become catwalks. Old gods are forced into retirement, and statues of Elagabalus himself, clad in golden robes and makeup, replace Jupiter in civic squares. Rome's religious establishment loses its collective mind. he abolishes Roman dress codes, togas. Out, makeup. Mandatory, he orders senators to appear before him in drag. He swaps armor for silk. Introduces Syrian perfume so strong they make generals faint. Issues a decree banning ugly sandals in public. Some whisper that Rome is being ruled by a madman, others say, finally, someone with taste. He hosts a lottery of nightmares. Every week, Elagabalus hosts a banquet and gives out prizes. Some guests receive gold, others get dead dogs. One man receives 100 pounds of lead and a funeral plot, another is locked in with a starving lion, another wakes to find himself married to a statue. It's never the same twice. He builds a tower of lovers. At the center of the palace, he constructs a rotating platform for his nightly conquests. They say he sleeps with 20 men a night, none more than once. Others say it's 50, he says, each man brings a new reflection of the god in me. His mother starts to worry. Rome reaches a breaking point. By the time Elagabalus is 17, the city is exhausted, the military wants a real emperor, the Senate wants the old gods back, even the palace eunuchs are nervous, so his grandmother, Julia Misa, a shrewd and terrifying woman, steps in. She convinces him to name his cousin Alexander Severus as co-emperor. At first, it seems like peace, then whispers rise. They want Alexander alone. The end comes in a marble pool. You hear the splash before the scream. The emperor is caught bathing with Hierocles, his husband. The guards move fast. There's no trial. No farewell, just knives. They kill Elagabalus. They kill his mother. They throw their bodies into the Tiber. Rome breathes a sigh of relief, then pretends none of it ever happened. The aftermath: his statues are destroyed, his name is scraped from monuments, his reign is called the lowest point in Roman history. But even buried in disgrace, Elagabalus lingers, in Renaissance paintings, in whispers among queers, in drag balls, opera arias, and academic footnotes. They tried to erase him, but you're here, you remember. Was he mad? Maybe. Was he cruel? At times, yes, but also, he was a teenager, in absolute power, born of a theocracy, queer before queerness had a language, the poet of the body. A painter of chaos, and beneath the wigs and incense and orgies, he was simply trying to build a world that fit him. You leave the palace. It's dawn now, the marble hallways are quiet. The rose petals have wilted. The statues are broken, but if you look up, just for a second, you see the first rays of sunlight hitting the city, and for a heartbeat, the whole world glows with golden fire. You close the book slowly, the weight of its pages pressing against your lap like a sleepy cat. Somewhere far away, a mad emperor is still throwing flower petals. A French king is still building perfume fountains. A Scottish monarch is nodding off beside his mute science experiment. And a Roman teen is still looking into a mirror, searching for the god he was promised he could be. But you're in a soft, quiet place now. The fire is low. The breeze at your window smells like old paper and lavender. The scandals have settled into dust, the poisoned goblets have been rinsed and shelved, the last eunuch has turned out the light. History is always louder than it should be, parades, beheadings, sermons, betrayals, but in the end, it's just people, hungry, curious, vain, lonely. They wore crowns and broke laws and wrote letters they regretted. They built statues taller than their own guilt. They were ridiculous, terrifying, tender. Some were perverts, some were poets, a few were both, and all of them, in the end, had to sleep, just like you. So stretch your arms, pull the blanket higher, let the last torch gutter out. There are no more kings tonight, just you, a sigh, and dreams older than empires. Good night.